There's a version of this story where I feel sorry for them. I've tried it on, turned it around in my head on quiet nights, held it up to the light to see if it fits. And every time I do, I come back to the same image, my mother's face at the kitchen table, not sad, not conflicted, calm, satisfied. The way you look when something you've been waiting for finally arrives. That was the night they told me to leave. And I did. I took my two suitcases and my laptop bag and I walked out of the house I'd grown up in. And I drove 3 hours through the dark and I didn't call anyone. Not yet. I want to tell you this story properly because it's not a simple one. There's no moment where I was purely good and they were purely evil. But there's a moment, quiet, almost anticlimactic, where everything that had been hidden finally came to the surface. And when it did, I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. Part 1. The family we were my. Name is Miriam. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life, I was the second daughter in a family that didn't really need one. That sounds harsh. I've spent years trying to find gentler language for it, and I can't. My sister Becca was 4 years older than me, and from the time I was old enough to understand anything, I understood that she was the one who mattered. Not because my parents said it out loud, they were careful not to, but because of the thousand small ways a family arranges itself around a center of gravity. Becca got the bigger room. Becca's recitals were circled on the calendar in red. Becca's college applications were treated like a family project. Mine were treated like something I was handling. I wasn't unloved. I want to be precise about this. My parents weren't cruel people, not in any recognizable way. They fed me and clothed me and showed up to things when it mattered. They said the right words. But love, I learned early, can be present in all the correct quantities and still somehow miss you, can hover just above your head and never quite land. Becca was golden. Not in the cliched way. She wasn't a cheerleader. She wasn't homecoming queen. She was sharp and funny and capable. And she had a talent for being exactly what my parents needed her to be at any given moment. When my mother needed a confidant, Becca was there. When my father needed someone to be proud of, Becca delivered. She understood the transaction in a way I never did, or maybe just never wanted to. I was quieter, more interior. I read a lot. I liked numbers, which my parents found boring. I had friends, but they weren't the kind of friends you bring home and show off. I got good grades, but never in the right subjects. I won a math competition in 8th grade, and my father said, "That's great, honey," and went back to watching Becca's volleyball game footage on his laptop. I don't say any of this for sympathy. I say it because you need to understand the architecture of what I grew up in, because it explains everything that came after. Part 2. What I built quietly. I studied finance in college. Not because anyone encouraged me, my mother once said with genuine puzzlement, "But what do you do with that?" But because I had a mind that liked systems, liked understanding how money moved and multiplied and disappeared. I liked the cleanness of it. The way numbers didn't have favorites. I graduated and got a job at a mid-sized investment firm. Junior analyst position, nothing glamorous, but it was solid work and I was good at it. I lived cheaply in a small apartment with 2 roommates and I saved aggressively. This wasn't a plan yet, it was just a habit. Money felt like the one thing I could control, and so I controlled it. Meanwhile, Becca had graduated with an arts degree, moved back home for 2 years, then married a man named Derek who had a nice jaw and vague ambitions. They lived 40 minutes from my parents. They had Sunday dinners together every week. My parents bought Becca and Derek furniture when they moved into their first apartment. Real furniture. A sectional sofa, a dining table, a bed frame. When I moved into my first solo apartment 3 years later, my mother sent me a card and $100 check. I tell you this not because I needed the furniture. I tell you because these things accumulate, they sediment. You tell yourself they don't matter, and then one day you realize they do. Not because of the money itself, but because of what the money means. What it says about who is worth investing in. I was 25 when I first started thinking seriously about real estate. One of my colleagues at the firm, a woman named Paula, 10 years older than me, extraordinarily competent, had been quietly building a small property portfolio on the side. Nothing dramatic, just a few small units in secondary markets bought deliberately, held for rental income. She talked about it the way other people talked about gardening. Matter of fact, patient. It's not glamorous, she told me once, but it's real. It exists. You can stand in it. I found that appealing, the standing in it part. I spent about a year educating myself, read everything I could find, ran numbers obsessively on my lunch breaks. I wasn't interested in flipping properties or becoming a landlord empire. I was interested in finding one thing, the right thing, and holding it. The beach house came up on a listing almost by accident. It was about 4 hours from the city in a small coastal town that had been quietly gentrifying for years. Not yet expensive, but trending. 3 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, a wraparound porch that faced west, which meant sunset views across the water. It had been on the market for 4 months because it needed work. The roof required replacing, the kitchen was decades behind, the septic system needed inspection. A lot of buyers had looked at it and walked away. I looked at it 3 times. I had been saving for 6 years. I had more in my investment accounts than most people my age had by 35, because I had lived deliberately and worked hard and paid attention to things that other people found dull. I made an offer below asking price, negotiated carefully, and closed on it 11 months after I first saw it. I was 27 years old. I told almost no one. Not from any strategic impulse. I wasn't playing a long game. Not yet. I just didn't talk about my financial life to my family. It had never been safe to, in the way that personal things aren't safe to share when you already know they'll be minimized or misunderstood. My mother would have asked why I needed a beach house. My father would have had opinions about the investment. Becca would have told Derek, who would have had more opinions. So I said nothing. I spent the next year doing the repairs. Flew out on weekends, hired local contractors for the major work, did smaller things myself, replaced the roof, updated the kitchen. Nothing fancy, but clean and functional. Fixed the porch boards, had the septic inspected and signed off. I was methodical about it, patient. It was, in a strange way, the most peaceful period of my life. When it was finished, I didn't list it as a vacation rental. I just had it, used it occasionally, let it sit. Then, 2 years after I bought it, my mother called me on a Sunday in March. "Your father and I are thinking of taking a little vacation," she said. "We haven't been to the coast in years. Do you know of anywhere nice?" "You know that area, don't you? You went up there a few times." I had mentioned the town in passing once, years before. Not the house, just the town. "Actually," I said before I'd fully thought it through, "I have a place up there. You could use it." There was a pause. "You have a place?" "A house. I bought it a few years ago. It's nothing special, but it's nice. 3 bedrooms. Porch facing the water." Another pause. "Miriam, why didn't you tell us?" "I don't know," I said. "It just didn't come up." This wasn't entirely true, but it was true enough. Part 3, the years of free vacations. They used the house. My parents went the following June for 2 weeks. Then they went again in August. They liked it, more than liked it. They loved it. My father, who had a stressful job in corporate sales and rarely fully relaxed anywhere, apparently sat on that west-facing porch for hours at a time watching the water. The following summer, they asked if they could go again. I said yes. Then Becca and Derek asked if they could use it for a week. I said yes. Then my parents started asking in advance, "Can we have the last 2 weeks of July?" And I would shift my own plans to accommodate them, which they didn't ask about and I didn't mention. This is the part of the story where people ask me, "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you set terms, charge rent, set a limit?" I thought about this a lot, and the honest answer is complicated. Part of it was that I genuinely wanted them to have it. That sounds hard to believe given everything that followed, but it's true. There was something that felt good about providing something they enjoyed, something they didn't know to ask for. It was a way of mattering that didn't require their recognition. The house existed and it was good, and they were in it, and I had made that possible. But part of it was also that I knew, somewhere below the level of conscious thought, that telling them the terms would change something. The moment I said, "This is mine, actually, and here are the conditions," that was the moment they would have to decide how to relate to it, to me. And I wasn't sure I wanted to see how they'd do that. So I kept it loose, kept it generous, kept it quiet. 3 summers passed this way. Then a fourth. Becca and Derek used it twice more. My parents started referring to it casually in conversation when we were at the beach house, without the possessive, without attribution, as if it was a place that simply existed for their use, like a good restaurant they discovered. I noticed this. I didn't say anything. My father once mentioned to a colleague, as I later found out through the grapevine of family friends, that they had a beach house they got to use in the summers, not their daughters. A beach house they got to use, as if it were a timeshare they'd invested in years ago. I noticed that too. Part 4, the job I need to tell you about the job, because the job is where the story turns. I had been with the same firm for 6 years when I was recruited away by a smaller fund with a compelling pitch and significantly better compensation. I made the move. For 2 years, it went well. Then the fund made some aggressive bets that didn't pay off, and the partners decided to restructure, and I was among the people let go. It was a Thursday in November. I had 11 years of strong professional history, solid credentials, and enough savings to live comfortably for 3 to 4 years without income. I was not in any material danger. But I had a bad night. You're allowed that, I think. Even when you're financially secure, even when you're competent and resourceful, there is something that happens when a job ends abruptly that doesn't care about your savings rate. Something in the body that reads it as failure, as exposure, as the loss of a structure you'd built your days around. I had a bad night. I made the mistake of calling home. My mother picked up and I told her what had happened, and for about 30 seconds she said the right things. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" And then my father got on the line. My father had opinions about the fund I'd joined. He'd expressed them 2 years ago when I made the move, not loudly, not cruelly, but persistently. It was too risky, he'd said. Too small. You had a good thing going at the other place. The implication, which I had brushed off, was that I had been impulsive, irresponsible, that I didn't quite know what I was doing. And now, on the phone, in the careful tone adults use when they are being kind while being devastating, he said, "Well, these things happen. I did have some concerns about that move, as you know." I said I knew. "Do you have a plan?" I said I did, because this might be a time to reconsider your priorities. Your sister and Derek have been very happy. There's something to be said for stability. My sister and Derek. My sister, who had moved back in with my parents at 25 because she and Derek were having financial stress. My sister, who my parents had quietly lent money to twice that was never repaid. My sister, whose stability was largely constructed on foundations my parents had helped pour. I said I appreciated the thoughts, and I got off the phone. 2 weeks later, I drove home for Thanksgiving. Part 5, the night they told me to leave. I want to be careful here. I want to tell you what happened without dramatizing it because the truth of it is quiet enough without embellishment. Thanksgiving dinner was tense. It often was. My parents asked Becca and Derek questions that had follow ups. They asked me questions that had endings. How are you holding up? Have you updated your resume? Are you thinking about going back to something more traditional? I answered. I kept my tone neutral. I drank 1 glass of wine and switched to water. After dinner, while Becca and Derek were watching television in the living room and my father was cleaning up, my mother found me in the kitchen and sat down across from me. "We've been talking," she said. I waited. "Your father and I were concerned." She paused, rearranging this thought. "You're 31. You've had this alternative path. The investments, the property, the unconventional choices, and now you've lost your job." "I haven't lost my footing," I said. "I have savings. I have a clear, we're not sure this is a healthy environment for you," she said. "Staying here, I mean, for the holiday. We think it might be better for you, for your process to have some time on your own, to focus." I looked at her for a long moment. "Are you asking me to leave?" "We're saying we think it might be better for you. Mom, are you telling me to leave your house?" A pause. "Yes, we think it's for the best." I asked where my father was. She said he agreed with her. I sat for another moment, looking at the table, at the rings left by wine glasses that weren't mine, at the centerpiece my mother had assembled from dried flowers and small wooden birds. Then I went upstairs and packed my bags. Becca did not come out of the living room. I don't know if she knew what was happening. I didn't ask. I loaded my car. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway. My father had come into the hall and was looking at a spot slightly to the left of my face. "Drive safe," my mother said. I drove for 3 hours in the dark. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I just drove and thought and arrived at the beach house. Part 6, the morning after I slept for 9 hours. I don't know why. Stress, maybe, or relief, or the particular exhaustion of a person who has been holding themselves together for a long time in the wrong place. I woke up to gray November light coming through the windows and the sound of water, and for a few minutes I just lay there and let it be quiet. Then I made coffee and sat on the porch. It was cold, I had a blanket, and the light was the flat silver white of late autumn coast, and everything was still. I'm not going to tell you I had a revelation on that porch. I didn't. What I had was something quieter, a clear and complete understanding of where I stood. I was 31 years old. I had 11 years of professional experience and strong credentials. I had been living below my means since I was 22. I had an investment portfolio, a clean financial history, and no debt. And I had this house, which I had found and bought and repaired and maintained for 4 years, which sat on land I owned outright, on a stretch of coast that had been appreciating steadily since the year I closed on it. My parents had just asked me to leave their house. I sat with that for a while. The absurdity of it and the sadness of it, and also, underneath, something that felt like the end of a very long performance. I had been for my entire adult life trying in some small or large way to earn a place in my family's estimation, to be worth taking seriously, to matter in the way Becca mattered. I had built something real and kept it private and lent it freely and never asked for anything in return, and they had thrown me out on the night I needed them most. Not out of malice. I don't think it was malice. I think they genuinely believed that distance was therapeutic, that I needed to focus, that their concern was a form of care. I think they had spent so many years not quite seeing me that they genuinely couldn't see me now. But that didn't change what it was. I went inside. I called my attorney, an old friend from college who had handled the real estate paperwork 4 years ago. I need to make some changes, I said, to the beach house situation. She said she'd call me back Monday. Part 7. What happened next? I want to be honest with you. I didn't plan anything dramatic. I wasn't sitting on that porch constructing a revenge narrative. What I was doing was simpler and more mundane and in some ways more final. I was ending the arrangement. The following Monday, I had a call with my attorney. I was going to list the property with a vacation rental management company. I had been meaning to do it for a while. The house sat empty more than I was comfortable with, and the numbers made obvious sense. This was a practical decision, unrelated to the Thanksgiving disaster, that I had been deferring for the sake of family convenience. I was no longer deferring it. The management company assessed the property and gave me a rental projection that made me quietly exhale. The house would generate meaningful income, particularly in summer months. It would be booked through them, maintained professionally, and no longer available for informal family use. I did not call my parents to tell them this. I let it settle. The call came in February. My mother had apparently been telling a friend about their beach house and mentioned planning a summer trip. The friend had Googled the property. She'd heard my mother describe it often enough that she could identify the area and the porch and found it listed on a vacation rental platform. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening, and her voice was a register I hadn't heard before. Not angry, exactly. Disoriented. Miriam, I need to ask you something. I said, okay. Is the beach house listed for rent? I said, yes. You listed it for rent without telling us? It's my house, Mom. I don't need to tell you before I make decisions about it. Silence. We were planning. You can book it through the platform, I said. Like anyone else. The rates are on the listing. Book it? She stopped. Miriam, we've been using that house for 4 years. We thought, what did you think? Another silence. Longer. We thought it was for family. It was, I said. And then it wasn't a good time for family. She understood what I meant. I heard it in the way the silence changed texture. That was, she started. Your father and I made a decision that night that we thought, Mom, I said, I'm not angry. I want you to know that. I'm genuinely not. But I'm not going to keep making the house available when it makes sense for me to do other things with it. That's all this is. She said she talked to my father. He called the following weekend. The conversation was shorter and less comfortable. He started from a position of mild offense. We didn't realize you just take it away like that, as if I'd repossessed something they'd owned, and I let him speak. And then I said, calmly, Dad, I bought that house when I was 27. I paid for every repair out of my own savings. I let you use it because I wanted to, and I've decided to stop letting you use it because I've decided to. That's the whole of it. He said he thought it was cold. I said I understood. He said that this felt like punishment. I said, is it possible that you've spent so long not thinking of me as someone who owns things and decides things that it's surprising when I make a decision? A very long pause. That's not fair, he said. Okay, I said. We hung up. Part 8. The months after Becca called me in March. She was gentler than I expected. Or maybe I expected wrong things of her. She said she was sorry about Thanksgiving. She said she hadn't known what our parents were going to do that night, hadn't understood until later what had happened. She said she should have come out of the living room. You didn't know, I said. I should have come out anyway, she said, when I realized you'd left. We talked for almost an hour. It wasn't a resolution. I'm not sure what would count as one. But it was honest in a way our conversations rarely had been, and I found, sitting on the porch of the beach house while we talked, that I didn't need it to be more than it was. My parents and I didn't speak much through the winter. In spring, my mother sent a card. Not an apology, exactly. More of a gesture. She said she missed me and that she hoped we could have dinner sometime. I replied, we made plans. The dinner was quiet and slightly formal and not entirely comfortable. And at the end of it, my father picked up the check, which was the most direct acknowledgement of anything he was capable of, and I accepted it. I don't know what we are now. Estranged is too dramatic. Reconciled is too tidy. We're something in the middle, navigating each other with more care than we used to, which is either a beginning or just a new kind of distance. The house is doing well. Summer bookings are strong. I'm up there occasionally in the off season, and I sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the water go dark, and it's mine in a way it never quite was when it was also theirs. Epilogue. What I want you to take from this. I don't think my parents are bad people. I've said that before and I mean it more as time passes. They are people who arranged their attention in a particular way for 30 years and couldn't quite reconfigure it when I needed them to. People who loved me functionally and missed me emotionally. People who, when confronted with my failure, reached for distance instead of presence, and who may not have fully understood until I withdrew something they thought they had access to, that I'd always been someone who built things. I'm not sure what they thought I was doing in those years of quiet. Drifting, maybe? Surviving. The way a background child is assumed to be surviving rather than building. But I was building. I was building the whole time. And when the structure finally became visible to them, not in the triumphant, announced way, but in the quiet, withdrawn way, I think something shifted. Not dramatically, not the way it shifts in stories, but in the way water moves rock, slowly, over time, in a direction you don't notice until you look back and see how much has changed. I'm 31 years old. I have a house on the coast that I own outright that sits in the last light every evening facing west. I have a career I'm rebuilding on my own terms. I have a sister I'm learning to talk to. And I have, for the first time in my life, the distinct and uncomplicated sense that I am someone who makes decisions about things that belong to me. That's not revenge. It's not even justice. It's just what it looks like when you finally stop performing for people who weren't watching anyway and start living for yourself. It turns out that's enough. It's more than enough.